Welcome to the Caregivers Coaching Corner. I'm Dementia Coach Diane, and if you're new to our channel, I'm sharing my journey as I care for my husband Ben, who's living at home with Lewy body dementia. Here's where we talk about the real life challenges involved with caregiving and self-care, because both really matter. And I base each video on topics that have been requested by the caregiving community. And my intention is to share what's worked for us, but to inspire you to share what's worked for you. Every case is a little different, but together, if we can all pool our suggestions and our ideas, we can come up with what's going to work in any given moment. Because together, we're stronger. And together, we've got this. So today I want to go a little deeper into communicating with our loved ones who are living with dementia and why grounding them or trying to ground them in our reality doesn't work. Let's face it, when someone is going through cognitive changes, their brains do not process the way they used to. And trying to convince them that they are wrong and that we're right oftentimes leads to confusion and upset and maybe even anger and aggression. Whereas if we can meet them where they are, we have a much better chance of helping them to stay calm, to stay focused, and to have a much better interaction. So I want to give some examples as we go along here. One of the things that happened early on with my husband is that he had a distorted sense of time. And he thought that his parents were still alive when in fact they had been dead for 30 years. So when he first started talking about his parents, I was confused and I was scared and I was reactive, and I tried to convince him that they had been gone for a long time. But all that really did for him was create a sense of confusion and more loss. It was like he was reliving the grief of having lost them. So I learned pretty quickly not to try to convince him of the truth, but rather engage him in what helped him to feel good. For instance, when he would talk about, wanting to see his mom or his dad or wondering how they were, I'd say like, wow, I've heard they're doing really well. Should we go see them? And he'd be like, yeah. I'm like, well, maybe we can do that tomorrow. Like, what should we do when we get there? And that would get him talking about his parents. I didn't try to get him off the topic per se, but it got him talking and thinking about them in a way that made him feel good. And then quite honestly, he would forget that that we were going to go see them, and the moment passed in a peaceful way. The other thing that oftentimes would happen is he would talk about wanting to go home. Now, this happens a lot, I think, with those living with dementia. And from my experience, I don't think it was a physical place that Ben was necessarily talking about. It was more needing a sense of comfort or familiarity or safety. So what I started to learn how to do early on, instead of saying, you are home, which once again was only going to probably lead to an argument or conflict, I would say, hey, can I go with you? And once again, he would always say yes. And then I'd say, what are we going to do when we get there? And what should we do? Or, what should we take with us? And that would get him, again, engaged in good feelings about going home as opposed to more confusion that he was home. Oftentimes I think we have all been raised, of course, to tell the truth and to stay grounded in reality. And so if you're in that place with your loved one where you're feeling reactive and scared, there's a natural tendency to want to correct them. But see if you can just take a deep breath and slow down a little bit and do your best to meet them where they are. Some other examples, like instead of saying something like, well, let's not talk about that, let's go for a walk. Don't be too quick to like redirect them or disengage them from what they want to talk about. Get them to express what they're thinking about, if you can. Just something as simple as saying, tell me more. sometimes if somebody's saying like, wow, I have to get ready, I have to go to work, they're just reliving something that maybe they did for years and years and years. And maybe at a certain time of day, they have this sense that they should be working and they have to get there. Ben was and is an artist and a musician, and he was creating like all the time. And he would have to go to gigs and he'd have to get ready and be there on time and have his chord charts and his bags and, all of his instruments and everything packed. So sometimes when he'd say like, well, I have to get ready for work, I'd say, how can I help you? And he would sometimes start to get his stuff ready. But quite honestly, a lot of times he would lose interest or lose focus and then naturally start to do something else. So if we can just stay calm and kind of go with their flow, I find that that helps the most. So really, I think the idea is, in general, meet them where they are, validate their feelings, and try to create moments of connection versus confrontation. And it's going to look different maybe every day, but if you can just use those general principles in mind, I think it can be really helpful. Another big one is driving. I mean, I have seen other people on social media like try to convince their loved ones that they've lost their license or they can't drive anymore, or we sold your car. And they think that if they just keep repeating the truth, that somehow their loved one is going to be convinced or is going to understand or isn't going to forget. But that's just not the case. For me, when Ben really was obvious he couldn't drive anymore, instead of trying to convince him that he couldn't because he kept getting lost coming back from familiar places, I'd say, hey, can you give me some driving tips? Would you mind if I drive? Because you're such a good driver and I need to slow down, but I really need you to help me. And every time I said that, he was fine with getting in the passenger seat. And now it's been long enough that that just has become our routine and he doesn't question it anymore. So these are just some ideas for what's worked for us. I know that they don't always work, but if we can remember the principle of the idea that their reality is the only one they know, and trying to convince them of our reality, from my experience, is never going to work. So again, think connection versus confrontation. Think about what's going to be truly helpful versus hurtful. Help them to feel validated in their feelings. And that, from my experience, if you lead with love and you lead with the intention to help them versus correct them, you'll find a way. So please put in the comments some of the ideas that have helped you help your loved one to stay calm, to stay peaceful, and to feel safe. And if this video is helpful, I would love it if you give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of these kinds of videos, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it, but that tells me a lot, and it tells YouTube that you want to see more of this kind of thing. So I'll continue to share from my experience, and I trust that you will put your tips in the comments, because you'll hear me say this a lot, but I really, really believe that together we are stronger, and together we've got this. Thanks.